Good morning. As we continue in our study of the Gospel of Luke, we do so in Luke chapter 14. And we are beginning this chapter for the very first time. And we begin with chapter 1. And for today, we're just going to think through together all the way through verse 14. So I will read Luke chapter 14, verses 1 through 14, and follow along with your Bibles. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, "Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to these things. Now he told a parable to those who were invited, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him, and he who invited you both will come and say to you, 'Give your place to this person.' And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." He said also to the man who had invited him, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the just." Well, as we get ready to think through these verses together, let's first pray together that God will help and direct for our understanding today. God, I think preaching is a remarkable task, a heavy task, but a wonder. And to sit together as preaching happens, to listen together, is just as remarkable, just as wonderful, just as heavy a task. And both need to be happening right now at this moment, preaching and listening, so that we will both be impacted and affected by your holy word. Thank you for this moment to sit together in our living rooms, maybe at our tables, and join together in thinking through these 14 verses that you have for us today. And God, what do you have for us today? Help us to hear with the ears you have given us, to hear what you have to say to us today, what you have for us today, and open our eyes to behold what you have for us out of these wonderful verses. In Jesus' name, amen. Oh, how the tables have turned. That is something that you either hear or probably see happen in something like a James Bond movie or a James Bond inspired movie. And whenever the tables have turned, it always involves people. And when the tables have turned, it means the situation has changed. This saying, "Oh, how the tables have turned," is something that was first found, the earliest we have found this phrase, is back in the year 1612. And it's in a book called The Widow's Tears, which I read is supposed to be a comedy. And in that book you find, "Oh, how the tables have turned." And one of the characters is telling an antagonist, "Soon you will be in my shoes." But what I thought was really remarkable about this phrase is that it actually originated in playing board games. And it's something that came about when the situation in the game would change into another person's favor, that the situation would reverse to another player. And so you would say something like this: oh, how the game table has reversed. Oh, how the game table has turned. A few decades later, in the year 1648, so the first year that we really see this phrase develop is the year 1612 in a book. And we know it comes from people gathering in homes playing board games. But a few decades later, we find this expression again. It's in the year 1648, and it's in a sermon. The preacher was urging all his listeners to consider another perspective, and to do so when they have committed a wrong that affects another person. And his big point to them was, whenever you have committed a wrong that affects another person, consider for a minute that if that wrong was done to you, how would you feel? It's almost like in our culture we would say, put yourself in their shoes. And the way he put it was this way: when you come to a situation like that, when you have committed a wrong that affects another person, he says this: but oh, how the tables turn. Do turn the tables. And the idea is kind of turn the tables on you. And it is from the idea of consider another perspective in this situation. I thought that was rather exciting. And so what I want us to do as we keep going in now into Luke 14, consider, oh, how the tables have turned. It always involves people. And it can be like in a situation, the situation gets reversed, like in a board game, or maybe like in a James Bond film. And also consider this: consider another perspective. I think we see those three things all throughout these 14 verses. Oh, how the tables have turned. Watch the situation get reversed. And consider another perspective. So let's put the big idea like this. The big idea of Luke 14, verses 1 through 14, is not, oh, how the tables have turned, but rather, oh, how the table has turned. Let's begin with verse 1. Luke 14, verse 1. And I want to begin with verse 1, not just because, well, that's the most ideal place to start, but verse 1 is rather important to everything else that happens in these 14 verses. We'll read it again. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. Now let's pay attention to those last few words. They were watching him carefully. Or maybe zero in a little closer. Watching him carefully. Some translations may simply just say this: they watched him. And I want to focus on those words because as you focus on they were watching him carefully, there's just so many questions that come along with those words. One being this: who is watching Jesus carefully? Now those words, watching him carefully, it's really just one Greek word. And it means this: to watch with great effort. And I kind of imagine this: whoever these people are, they're watching Jesus with tremendous effort. Or to put it this way, they're watching his every move. And I pictured watching the movement of his hands, where his hands go, watching his facial expressions, watching how he's sitting in his chair. It's just watching every little detail that this man does. So let's keep thinking about it that way. There's somebody, some group of people who are watching Jesus every move. And I think the first question to ask is this: who is watching his every move? Now, if we keep looking at verse 1, notice how Luke, and I think he does this deliberately, he keeps their identity a secret. It's really ambiguous. The most he tells us is this: they are watching his every move. Now, in verse 3, it seems like their identity gets revealed. But as we begin, the most we know is that it's they. And what do we know about the word they? It's always more than one person. So there must be 2, 3, 4 people that are watching now Jesus very carefully with great effort. They're keeping notes, keeping tabs of everything he does, everything he says, every movement he makes. They'll be watching him. They're keeping tabs on his every move. So we need to keep thinking like that. Who are these people? Who is watching his every move? Okay, question number 2. And it might seem the most important question, and maybe the first one that you ask when you read verse 1. Why are they watching his every move? What in the world is going on? That as soon as this chapter begins, not only are there a group of people watching Jesus' every move, but why? And it gets introduced to us right away as the chapter begins. So that seems kind of important, right? Why are they watching Jesus' every move? Okay, now question number 3. And this is an important question too. When are they watching his every move? Now we get this answered right away in verse 1. When are these people watching Jesus' every move? Do you see it? It's on the Sabbath. So right away, Luke locates this timing for us. He tells us when. When is this happening? On the Sabbath. Now, how can we think about the Sabbath? Well, right away, let's think about it this way. This is their most revered day of the week. Another way of thinking about the Sabbath or identifying it, the Sabbath is Saturday. So let's just, for our own purposes, let's think about this as Saturday. When are they watching his every move? Saturday. And to think about Saturday, in this culture, Saturday is the most revered day of the week. It's a day of rest. And what are they doing on this day of rest? They're watching Jesus' every move. Now the 4th question, this is the final one. And I think it's the big question. I think it's the most important question we can ask. Yes, there's why and who, and there's the when, but you have to notice this. Where are they watching his every move? And again, this answer is right there in verse 1. We see it right away. Where are they watching Jesus' every move? One Sabbath, that's when, but where? When he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees. So where are they watching Jesus' every move? You have to note this. It's in a house. It's in someone's home. But get a little bit more specific. Where in this home are they watching Jesus' every move? Why is Jesus there? Luke tells us is to dine at the house of this ruler of the Pharisees. So I want to put it this way. Where are they watching Jesus' every move? It's at the dinner table. Everything that happens in these verses happen at the dinner table in this house. That's really important to remember. Everything that happens at the dinner table in this house. I want you to just write this down so you can see the whole flow of this chapter. Luke 14, 1 through 6 happens at the dinner table in this house. Luke 14, verses 7 through 11 happens at the dinner table in this house. Verses 12 through 14 of Luke 14 happens at the dinner table in this house. And then Luke 14, verses 15 through 24 happens at the dinner table in this house. Now next week, that's when we'll get to those verses. But for today, we're really just looking at Luke 14, 1 through 14. I don't want us to miss it. Where are they watching his every move? Everything that happens at the dinner table in this house. I want to make this statement. Why is that important to know? And I think it's for this reason, that in every home, the dinner table is set apart. In every home, the dinner table is set apart. Why is that? It's because at the dinner table, that is where we gather. That's where we gather to kind of shut off the rest of the world and unite around a table, looking at each other, to enjoy one another, to talk with one another. And if you think about it, What's the one place in your home that actually brings everyone together? It's the dinner table. And we see this same principle in every local church. There is a table that brings every local church together. What is that table? We call it affectionately the Lord's table, sometimes the Lord's Supper or communion. And it's really important to hold on to this beauty when it comes to communion in the local church. It's the Lord's table. It's the table that brings us all together. Well, in the home, the dinner table operates in the very same fashion. That's where we gather. The dinner table brings us together. So that's why I want to say that in every home, the dinner table is set apart. And the reason that Luke begins right away by telling us specifically where this is all happening, it's not just in a home, but where in that home? At the dinner table. Every verse, Luke 14, 1 through 24, happens at this dinner table. And why is that? It's because that's where we gather. It brings the whole home together. And I think the reason he brings our attention to it right away, and we'll see this, is because the dinner table here is getting overlooked. And I kind of wondered, how many of our homes is the dinner table being overlooked? It's happening here. So let's dive right in, and maybe let's ask this question. We'll come to it because it's going to help answer the rest of the questions. We asked 4 so far. We asked first, who is doing the watching? Who is watching Jesus' every move? But the question I want to focus on first is this: why are they watching Jesus' every move? Well, again, let's start there in verse 1. Why are they watching Jesus' every move? Notice what we're told right away. It's the Sabbath. That's why they're watching Jesus' every move. And what did we already know about the Sabbath? Well, it's the most revered day of the week. It's Saturday. And it's the day to rest, to kind of cease from labor and just rest. And I think the way to think about labor is the duty you have to do. It's your job, where you have to punch a clock and be told what to do from 9 to 5. Here's this day where you cease from that and you just rest. It's the work that is like our duty. And this is a day, it's actually a command all the way back in the Old Testament, one of the 10 commandments: remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy, set it apart from the other 6 days. So a reason that this group here, and we haven't identified them yet, we could take a really accurate guess as to who they are, having studied Luke chapter 1 through Luke chapter 13. But the reason so far that they're watching Jesus carefully is because it's the Sabbath. It's the day to rest. And as they're watching him carefully, as they're opening up their composition notebook and they're taking notes, or they have their yellow legal pad out and they're taking notes, the big question on their notepad is, what will he do? And in watching his every move, what will Jesus do? And it gets a little bit more specific. What will he do when standing before him is a man in need? How do we know that? Well, in verse 2, what does Luke bring our attention to? He says, and behold. That's telling us, the reader, pay attention. Take a look at this. Behold, there was a man before Jesus. And remember, where is Jesus at? He's at the dinner table. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And so as they're watching Jesus carefully, they're asking themselves, what will he do? What will he do as this man is before him in need? What kind of need? Well, he's suffering. It could very well be that he is suffering from head to toe in 24/7 discomfort. The idea here is that his body is swollen, being filled with fluid. Constant discomfort. There's not a single position this man can get in to rest. Now, what's interesting, we don't know his identity. We just know he's a man. We don't know how old he is. And think about that. when anybody that was suffering came before Jesus, there are times that we're told how old they are. And if we're not told how old they are, we're at least told this, how long they've been suffering. That's not given to us here. So we don't know who the man is. We don't know how long he's been suffering. We don't know where he came from even. The most we know is this: he's a man in need who is suffering, and quite possibly from head to toe. But I think we can say this. I think we know something else. And what we know is this: I believe this man was invited. I think he was brought here for the wrong reason. Why is that man there? I think he was invited. And I think he was invited by one person. And he was invited for one reason. It was not to sit at this dinner table. He was simply invited for this reason: what will Jesus do? I love verse 3. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees. And what I love about it is, it starts out this way: and Jesus responded. Now, so far, no question has been asked. What is he responding to? He's not responding to any question. He's not responding to any comment. What is Jesus responding to? It has to be this: he is responding to them watching his every move. And in verse 3, we get their identification. Who are these people that are watching his every move? They are the lawyers and Pharisees. Think about the lawyers and Pharisees this way: these are the Bible defenders and those who think they live out the Bible and put it into practice. That's a good way of thinking about these two groups of people, or these two people. These are people who defend the Bible. They're trained in understanding and knowing the Bible and to defend it and to answer your questions about it. The other group, the Pharisees, these are the people who do their very best to live out the Bible, to put it into practice. They are the ones watching him carefully, and they're watching him wondering, what will he do when a man on the Sabbath is put before him who is in deep need, who is suffering greatly? And notice how Jesus responds to this group. Verse 4, or verse 3, and Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Now, what I thought was interesting, it's not the first time he's asked this question. He has asked this question before, and he asked it all the way back in Luke chapter 6, verse 9. And do you know what happened then when Jesus asked that question? Nothing. When Jesus asked it then, no one answered it. Notice what happens here in verse 4. How does this group answer? Verse 4 says they remained silent. They didn't answer either. Now, we want to know this. Why? Why did they not answer? Another way of thinking about Jesus' question is this: is it wrong to heal someone on the Sabbath? Anytime this happens in the Gospels, when Jesus heals someone on the Sabbath, and there's a group that's upset about it, I kind of wondered, well, how often have you ever seen this happen? The odds are 0. The odds are in your lifetime, you've never seen a life fully restored by either just the touch of a man or by his word. This is rather unique to Jesus. And so if you're seeing something for the very first time in your lifetime, or something's happening in your lifetime that is unheard of, why would you respond with, stop it, don't do that? And so Jesus is asking them, come on, just think. According to the Bible, is it wrong to heal someone on the Sabbath? Or put it this way, according to the Bible, is it wrong to alleviate someone's pain and suffering on the Sabbath? And the answer is no. There's nowhere in the Bible that says don't do that. Now the question here is, when Jesus says, is it lawful? According to which law? And this group of Pharisees and lawyers, do you know which law they really gave themselves to? Not so much the law of the Bible, but the law of the traditions of man. And so if they say yes, they're kind of revealing to Jesus which law they really adhere to, the law of the Bible or the law of the traditions of man. And that would be very revealing, right? It says we don't put the Bible as the top authority, we put it submissive to another authority. And in turn, if they said yes, you could accuse them of belittling the Bible or adding to it, making man's authority, what man says, a little bit higher than what God says. But it's interesting, they remain silent. Now notice the rest of verse 4. This just surprised me. I want you to notice how quickly verse 4 happens. But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. I kind of wondered, why does that happen so quickly? You almost don't see that anywhere else when Jesus heals someone. You don't see him just taking the person, healing them, and then saying, you need to depart. But why does he do it here? Why is this so different? I think we need to ask this question. When Jesus healed somebody, what was he doing? When Jesus healed someone, he was freeing them from the bondage of their suffering. He was freeing them from their pain. But how often do we see Jesus heal on the Sabbath? We see it at least 4 or 5 times in the Gospel of Luke so far. Why, though, did Jesus heal anyone on the Sabbath? Well, keep in mind, what is the Sabbath all about? It's about being freed from work. Sabbath was a day of rest. It's the one day we don't report for our duty, our 9-to-5 duty. We are freed from our labor. We are freed from our work. For what purpose? Simply to rest? No. I like to think about it this way. The whole point of the Sabbath is this: freed from work and freed for worship. Because think about it. On the Sabbath day, this day that's set apart, what would you do? You would go to the synagogue to worship. You would go to the synagogue for preaching, for singing, for fellowship, for prayer. And you were freed from work so that you could be free for worship on the Sabbath. So how does that coordinate with why Jesus healed on the Sabbath? When you go back and look at anybody that Jesus healed, what was typically their reaction after he healed them? Typically, you'd have to agree, was this: they rejoiced. They praised and they glorified God. Now, the last time that Jesus healed anyone on the Sabbath was the previous chapter. It was Luke chapter 13. And it was a woman who has been disabled for 18 years. When Jesus healed her, the healing was immediate. And what did that woman do? It says she glorified God. And we could put it this way: she worshiped. So what do we see happening when Jesus heals anyone on the Sabbath? It's a picture for us. We see him freeing a person from their bondage of suffering so that now they are freed for worship. And it's related to this question. And I think it's a picture for us. You got to keep this in mind. Any healing that Jesus performed in the Gospels was temporary. It was temporary. Was it good? Yes. But each of those people that Jesus healed, this is why I say it was temporary. What always happened to those individuals? They could get sick again. They could get injured again. They could get disabled again. But I know this for a fact: every single one of those individuals eventually died. The healings were always temporary. Were they good? Yes. Did the person, I hope, appreciate it? Yes. Did the person, I hope, not waste it? Yes. But we need to think bigger. It's a picture for us. Why did Jesus heal anyone on the Sabbath? Again, it was to free them from their bondage in that suffering so that they were freed for worship. And it's a picture that points us to this. It does point us to the cross. And so we need to ask this question: why did Jesus die for sinners? Why did Jesus die for sinners? here it is. Jesus died to free us from our bondage to sin, that we might be freed for worship. Because what's the lifestyle of every saved sinner? What's the lifestyle of every rescued sinner? The lifestyle of every rescued sinner is, I am now freed for worship. And so I think that's why Jesus healed on the Sabbath. It's a picture for us that points to the ultimate freeing. Your greatest need is not to be healed from your physical suffering. Your greatest need, my greatest need, is to be rescued from the bondage to sin. And the only person who has the ability and the will to free us from our bondage to sin is Jesus the Christ. And he did so victoriously and triumphantly at the cross. Something none of us can ever do. And I think that's why Jesus healed on the Sabbath. But what's rather interesting is, notice here, it's immediately he takes the man, he heals him, and he sends him away. Why? I think Jesus is tired of making the same point over and over again. By the way, this is really the last mention of Jesus doing anything on the Sabbath. The word Sabbath is mentioned again one more time in Luke chapter 23. And do you know what happened there? Nothing. It's the day between Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday. And the most we're told there is that the women, they got spices prepared for burial. And then as the Sabbath began, they didn't do anything. They went home and they rested. This is the last record in Luke of Jesus doing anything on the Sabbath. And what did he do? Well, he healed a man, but he did it rather quickly and sent him away. And I think it's because he's tired of making the same point with this group. And he's tired of making the same point because time after time, this group is not seeing the point. And why don't they see his point? It's because they don't see people. To take it a little bit further, why don't they see his point? It's because they don't value people. And I think we're finally getting to a point where Jesus is just tired of making the same point to these people who claim to defend the Bible and live it out. And I think it breaks his heart. Because as we'll see, this seems to be the most calm, the most tender he is with this group of people. And I think it's out of his mercy he's doing all he can to reach these people who think they don't need to be reached. And at the heart of it is, you don't see people. Now Jesus will ask a second question. It's there in verse 5. And it's a question he's asked again, or asked previously. He asked this in Luke chapter 13. So he asked two questions that he's already asked previously. And why is that? Well, you guys don't get the point. And notice their reaction when he asked this question. We'll read it. Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? And what's their response? And they could not reply to these things. Now here, why could they not reply to these things? Why did they not reply? I think it's very simple. It would reveal their heart. Would you rescue an animal on the Sabbath? They would all say yes. So why are you complaining about me rescuing a person on the Sabbath? See, it would reveal where their heart is. We're talking about a group of people who do not value people. And what should be really heartbreaking is that these are religious people. These are people who defend the Bible and who do their best to live it out. What are they missing out on? Valuing people. Okay, now let's move on. Verses 7, 11, and 12 through 14 are two separate parts, but they're related. The man has been sent away. See, he really wasn't invited to come sit at the dinner table. He was invited for some other reason. It was just to try to make some point about Jesus. And I think Jesus, in his heartache, says, you guys, in doing it, you've totally missed the point about that man. And he sends him away. And he sends him away because Jesus just wants now to talk to everyone who's seated at the table. And it's right here, when they refuse, they know we can't answer because it will reveal our hearts. This is when the table turns. They thought they had Jesus in those first 6 verses. Like, we got him, we trapped him, let's see what he'll do. And it's now that the game is reversed. And Jesus has their entire attention. And the first group he wants to talk to are the people who have been invited to the table. Can we think about these people in a very specific way? Remember, I told you, these are Bible defenders and people who put the Bible into practice, who try to live it out. But can we think about these people differently? The answer is yes. I want us to think about these people as you and me. That this is you and me. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean it like this. On this Sabbath day, and we'll call it Saturday, what would they have done with their Saturday? They would have gone to the synagogue to gather for worship. And so we can think of it like this. This is dinner time, so what have they done already? They've already worshiped. They went and heard preaching. They sang together. They read the Bible. They heard it read out loud, and they prayed together. They have worshiped. And here is why I say, let's think about this as you and me. You and I are people that look forward to Sunday. And I think we would all agree that even during this pandemic, what is something that we really miss? Church online just does not cut it. It's the best we can do right now, but it's not the same, right? Because we're not physically together. And we look forward to Sunday as being that day that we get together to hear preaching, to sing, to pray, to fellowship. But as we do those things, don't miss out on this one important element. Value people. When we gather for preaching, value people. When we gather for fellowship, value people. When we gather to sing together, value people. It sure seems to me that if we do all those things without valuing people, do you know what we sound like? A clanging cymbal or a noisy gong. We sound like white noise. And so really important to all those things is how we treasure people. And Jesus now has this group's entire attention. They're all seated around the table. And the first people he wants to address are those who have been invited to this dinner table. Let's read it. Now, he told a parable to those who were invited. When he noticed, really important, Jesus noticed something. I thought that is in contrast to them watching him carefully. Well, he's been watching them carefully too. He noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor. I take that to mean like the seat closest to the bride and groom. When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. So this is like the table, the seat closest to the wedding party. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, hey, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to have to get up and go to the lowest place. But when you are invited, go sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, what are you doing sitting here? Move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. What did Jesus notice happening at this dinner table? He noticed that all those who are invited, they're scrambling. They're pushing one another over to get the best seat. And I do think here at this dinner table, the best seat would be the one closest to the host, like seated at his right hand. And so he noticed that everyone is just bumping over one another. They rode up in their chariot, got their chariot parked, and they ran as fast as they could to get inside the house and make their way to that dinner table without being told where to sit. Maybe they saw their name placed down here at one end and they switched it around with somebody to say, see, I got moved closer. And they right away moved to those other seats. Well, what were they doing? They were not waiting for the other dinner guest. And we have that as a biblical principle in 1 Corinthians 11. When it comes to the Lord's table, there was a church that was really scrambling to get to the table to eat first. And when they were doing that, they were knocking over all kinds of people to be the first in line to fill their bellies. And Paul says, when you guys come to the table, here's what's really important. Wait for one another. Now, why is that? It's the same point that Jesus is making here. He says, wait for one another. When you come to the dinner table, wait for one another. Don't you pick out your seat. You wait to be told where to be seated. Why is that? Because you don't know who you're going to have the opportunity to sit next to the left of you, to the right of you, right in front of you. Here's why I'm saying that the dinner table is set apart. It's because it's the place that we gather and we get to sit next to other people. And there's two things that happen at the dinner table. The first is this. When we come to the dinner table to sit next to other people, do you know what opportunity we have? We get to share a bit of ourselves with that other person. Because what are you going to do at the dinner table besides eat? You're going to talk. And especially if you don't know the person, or you don't know the person that well, what kind of things are you going to talk about? You're going to ask questions to get to know each other. And in so doing, you're going to share a bit of yourselves with another person. So that's the first thing that happens at the dinner table. We share a bit of ourselves with another person. Here's the second thing. That person has the opportunity to share a bit of ourselves with us. So what's happening at the dinner table? It's this. We're sharing our lives together. And Jesus is saying this. You have a rich opportunity to let God seat you next to somebody. You don't know who you get to minister to and who might get to minister to you. I had this great opportunity the other day, just meeting with someone around the table in my office. And all we did was ask each other questions. We haven't seen each other in a few weeks. I thought, that's the dinner table experience. We get to sit down and share in one another's lives. And he said to me, you've been asking me a lot of questions. I haven't had an opportunity to ask you a question. We laughed because he said, I want to know what you've been up to. And that's the beauty of the dinner table in our homes. It brings us together to have some little moment to share our lives with each other. But when we're scrambling to get to the best seat, who are we ignoring? We're ignoring everyone else. And Jesus gives a great warning. He says, when you do that to exalt yourself, I can guarantee you this will happen. You will be humbled. And for all those who wait, you will be exalted. Okay, now verse 12. So there, Jesus is addressing those who were invited to the table. And starting with verse 12, Jesus wants to address the one who did the inviting. And who is that? It's this ruler of the Pharisees, this leader. It's his home. Jesus is about ready to talk to the one who owns the table. He's about ready to talk to the one who owns the home. He's about ready to talk to the one who's invited all these people into his home. And notice what he says first. He said also to the man who invited him, hey, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors. Now here's what I thought was interesting. He didn't say neighbors, he said your rich neighbors. I thought, what does that say about this man? That the neighbors he invited were the ones that he knew were rich. I told you that that man with dropsy, he was there for one reason. Someone invited him. And who do you think that was? I think it was this man, the man owner of the home, the man who owned the table. But what did he neglect to do? He neglected to invite that man all the way to his table. I'm going to take a wild guess. Somehow this ruler of the Pharisees knew that man. Could it be that he was one of his neighbors? just not one of his rich neighbors. And in essence here, in verse 12, Jesus is saying, I've noticed who you've invited. Minus that rich neighbor, I've noticed who you invited. The people you've invited are the people you're most comfortable with. And what Jesus is getting at is, why do you limit your table to those that you're most comfortable with? Now, there's nothing wrong with inviting people into your home that you're most comfortable with. And think about who the people you're most comfortable with. You're most comfortable with family. I think you should then be most comfortable too with your church family. And I think it is good to be comfortable with your neighbors, to say, come into my home. I want you to gather around my dinner table. But Jesus is saying, don't limit yourself. Don't limit your table to just those people that you're most comfortable with. How about you start to think about how you can open up your table to those who are really in need, who need the experience of not just being in someone's home, but being at home. Being in a place where they feel like they can be themselves and you can be yourself with them. He's saying you should be using your dinner table to be reaching others. And don't limit yourself on who those others are. It's safe to always include those that we're comfortable with. But he says, expand your area of outreach to those people that Jesus says here are the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. And if you go all the way back to Luke 4, Jesus says, it's those people I came to save anyway. And it's almost like Jesus saying this, would you not limit your circle of those that I came to save? Broaden your circle. And who did Jesus came to save? He came to save everybody. And there's all kinds of people with all kinds of experience that we as Christians can open our home, open our dinner table to reach. I was thinking about our dinner table. And at our dinner table, we have an extra chair at our dinner table every night. There's 5 of us that gather to that table, but that table can occupy one more person. Now, there's been times I've said to Lisa, I want to remove that chair. And every time I've said that, she said, no. Actually, she didn't say it like that. She just said, no. And so I've always done what she says. But it's got me thinking about that chair. And I got convicted, and I thought, that chair needs to be occupied more regularly. And sometimes our girls have their friends over. Sometimes they want to eat with us, sometimes they don't. But still, that chair should be open for all kinds of people, that we can come to our dinner table. We want you to experience us, and we want to experience you. We want to share our lives with you. We want you to share your life with us. The dinner table is what is to draw people together. And I think the dinner table is a tremendous mission field that opens our home so that we might open our lives around that dinner table. The way I wanted to put it is like this. I think about the reason. Why would we do that? When you think about it, there's not a single one of us who cannot share our table with somebody. And when you think about our table, the size of our table is limited, right? The amount of people that can fit around that table is limited, right? And that's nothing to do with the size of the table. It doesn't mean get a bigger table. No matter what size your table is, it's still limited as to how many can gather around that table. And that's a good thing. Because at the table, it's good that we're limited about how many people can gather, because it creates a nice intimate setting for one-on-one time where we can experience, I'm just focused on you right now. Not on 20 people at a huge banquet table, but at this small table, no matter what the size is, it's still limited. No matter what size the room is, it's still limited. But it gives us the opportunity to just be focused on that guest and how we can best meet their needs. So I wanted to put it this way. We share our home with others, and we share our table with others so that we can share in the lives of others. And I want to end just with this thought. We all have to think about this question and answer it. for all of us as Christians. What am I doing with my dinner table? And I think that's what Jesus left these Bible defenders and those who think they're living out the Bible. That's what he left them with to think about. Because if you notice in Luke 14, they never really open their mouths. Well, next week we'll see one man who does. And he kind of acts like he thinks he's getting it. And Jesus will have a whole lot to say to him and to the whole group. But the tables have turned. The table has turned. Jesus has their attention. And I think he's trying to reach them. It's the most calm, most sweet, most tender I think we see him with this group of people. And it's people that should not be overlooking the table as those who are trying to live out the Bible, practice what it teaches. And I'll say it one more time for all of us as Christians. What am I doing with my dinner table?